Let's get right into it. JD was dodging questions like Greg Allman dodged the draft, and coincidentally, also shot himself in the foot. After sitting down with Rogan this week, a sitting vice president said something out loud that people in his position are usually very careful not to say. He admitted that his own peace deal, the one that he was personally sent to negotiate, was being actively sabotaged, and he got about as close as a man in his chair can get to naming exactly who's doing it. Let's take a listen.
But I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that there have been people within the Israeli government who are trying to actually shift us away from that policy because they want to continue the military campaign. There are some people within their system we know beyond a shadow of a doubt who are manipulating and trying to change American public opinion to keep the war going on indefinitely.
Beyond a shadow of a doubt? That's not some people have concerns. That's not diplomatic hedging. That's the Vice President of the United States saying plainly that figures inside of a foreign government are working to keep America in a war that the American people never asked for. And JD, he was right about two things. One, the public was exhausted before this conflict ever started. Nobody was in the streets begging for another decade-long war in the Middle East. And two, watching Rogan actually push back on Vance reminded me of the old days. Rogan actually pressed for answers. That was the most awake that show has looked in years.
Do you think that Israel is affecting American political judgment?
What I say to these guys is right now, Israel is losing the public opinion battle in the United States of America. It is a simple and obvious fact.
Well, the narrative is that Israel has a very disproportionate effect on American politics.
Look, do they try to influence American politics? Yes. It's a country of 9 million people. We have 330 million people.
Concern is that they're spying on American politicians, that there's concerns about funding, there's concerns about influence, there's concerns about whether or not politicians are whether they're aligned with Israel or whether they're aligned with the United States first.
To the Americans who sort of see this and are frustrated by it, my attitude would be you should be frustrated at American leaders who are, persuaded by this, affected by this. What does bother me is when those operations, those influence campaigns actually affect American political judgment because they shouldn't. Because we should be thinking what is in the best interest of the United States of America.
But here's what makes this whole thing funny. Because the same vice president, the one warning us about secret foreign influence campaigns and hidden agendas, is also the guy this exact same week who suddenly rediscovered his deep burning passion for releasing the Epstein files. Convenient timing. And here's the problem with timing. He's the vice president. The FBI answers to his administration. If he can't get Kash Patel to open a filing cabinet, why in the hell would he expect voters to trust him to run the whole country? And simply saying, I'll release the files, is only politician for, I've seen the polling.
What was the purpose of that performative display of the Epstein files? And she was saying there's tens of thousands of hours of film.
I don't know what the purpose of it was, but I know that the effect of it was to make people mistrust the entire effort. And what I think was happening, look, I know Pam, I like Pam. I don't think there's anything malicious going on. I think Pam was trying to respond to the political moment. I think she overstated what we had and what we didn't have. You and I have talked about this a lot. I'm like one of the OG Epstein conspiracy theorists. I've probably gone down every single rabbit hole we could go down.
What's the reason why they're so keen on continuing to bomb?
You have people who are influenced by defense contractors. There's a lot of talk about how much is the Israeli government influencing American politics, and there are certainly certain people within the Israeli government who hate the deal. There are certain influencers in America who are being paid in order to attack the deal.
So, let's follow that. A foreign-funded influence campaign running through American conservative media, paying influencers to turn their audience against the exact deal that Vance was trying to close. Can you imagine that? And then he got very specific as to how they're doing it.
I think there are a lot of social media campaigns that definitely influence Americans and affect Americans. Definitely think you have seen this very discreet, extremely well-funded campaign to try to derail the negotiation and try to derail the deal. And there's this Time article that came out yesterday. A friend sent it to me, lists a bunch of people who have quite literally been paid by a former Trump campaign person who was himself paid by certain elements within the Israeli government.
But just 4 minutes into a painstaking 3-hour interview with Rogan, this happens.
Yeah, I don't see any other president. I mean, if you become president, you're not going to do that, right?
I don't know, man.
Oh, I think you know, JD. I don't know, man. That's how you announce a presidential campaign in 2026. You grow a beard, go on Rogan, and act like he just asked you to appear on Kill Tony. President? Me? Wow. Never really thought about that. Right. Look, I'm probably being cynical, but that's what I do. However, most people are onto the fact that politicians suddenly have this extraordinary ability to rediscover exactly what their voters are angry about right before an election cycle. You know, when they finally realize that they need us to vote them back into office. Which brings us right back to our old pal Jeffrey Epstein. And then Rogan brings up a valid conspiracy that the only reason why we may have gotten involved with this war in the Middle East is because Israel is blackmailing Trump, which of course Vance vehemently denies.
If people want to say we mishandled the Epstein release, guilty. We did mishandle, especially the communications of it. I've heard this argument is this idea that Donald Trump, was sort of, I've even heard people say he was blackmailed into this.
Yeah,
by
a lot
the
of people
Israelis.
think that.
Or whether you agree or disagree with the decision to launch the campaign Epic Fury to begin with, the idea that Donald Trump is being blackmailed is crazy to me.
Can you understand, though, why people would come to that conclusion, especially because of the Epstein files?
What do you mean?
Well, the Epstein files were supposed to be released. And there was a tremendous amount of resistance to those files being released. And that concerned a lot of people. Because if you're talking about very wealthy, powerful people that were engaged in crimes.
I see. So you're basically saying the fear is that whatever's in the Epstein files was used to blackmail the administration into doing the Iran thing.
Or at the very least, the people that were involved in the Epstein files that didn't want them coming out had undue influence.
We absolutely screwed up the comms of the Epstein files, like we just did.
And there we have it, folks. They screwed up the comms. Does that sound familiar at all? If I remember correctly, the comms got screwed up during both 9/11, October 7th, and now the Epstein files. Different administrations, same foreign influence. But in fairness to JD, just a few minutes later, he basically accepts responsibility for the administration mishandling the release.
Well, it's obvious that Epstein was a sick man.
Yes, but if people want to say we mishandled the Epstein release, guilty. We did mishandle, especially the communications of it.
What do you think should have been done?
I think that we should have just dropped everything at the very beginning. And obviously it takes a little time to review the stuff, to find the stuff, to redact things where you have victims and so forth. But we should have just done it as quickly as possible.
Good. Like I said, I'll give credit when it's due. Rarely does a politician actually come out and say, yeah, we screwed up. That's a start. At least we're getting somewhere. JD said that the administration mishandled it. JD said material should have been released faster, and it's safe to say that we all agree with him. But unfortunately for JD, that's where we have both a problem and a disconnect. Because at some point during this interview, he started to sound like one of us. As if he's sitting at his home yelling at his TV, "Why won't somebody get to the bottom of this?" JD, you're that somebody. You're the person in Washington. You're the vice president. You're not filing FOIAs. You're not protesting outside of the FBI headquarters demanding answers. You're not scrolling Reddit. JD is quite literally the man inside the building. And then Rogan asks, how much information does the vice president actually have access to? Which then leads to this.
What is it like being the vice president? How much access do you have to information?
I have effectively unlimited access to information.
Unlimited.
I'm sorry. Effectively unlimited access? Well, That contradicts his previous messaging a bit when he sounded like nothing more than a concerned citizen. Apparently, this concerned citizen has an office in the West Wing and top secret security clearance. That's not some lunatic ranting online. That's the sitting VP saying, I've essentially got unlimited access. So my question isn't why won't anybody help JD, but rather, what exactly has JD done to release the files? And to be fair, Vance said that he has personally reviewed a lot of the material, but then he goes on to say that he has not seen any definitive evidence establishing some of the broader theories people believe about the case. That's relevant, and I'm not going to chop it up and pretend otherwise. But here's the caveat, JD. If you truly believe the government mishandled the release of the Epstein files and releasable information should have come out faster, you just admitted to having unlimited access. So, tell the people what's left. Stop with the vague promises. Tell us what's legally being released, and tell us what's being withheld, and why. And tell us what you're personally doing to make the Epstein files public. And do it now, not President Vance someday, Vice President Vance today. Because this is when my bullshit detector starts to go off. We've all heard candidate Vance before. Let's travel back to October 2024 when JD goes on Tim Dillon and Iran comes up. Listen to what candidate Vance has to say America's interest is.
You have a looming, potentially larger war in the Middle East with Iran.
Right.
You know, after everything, obviously, we just talked about like getting America back on track and figuring out how to allocate resources to people in this country. How do we handle that?
Well, I mean, a couple of principles, right? So obviously, you know, Israel has the right to defend itself, but America's interest is sometimes going to be distinct. Like sometimes we're going to have overlapping interests, and sometimes we're going to have distinct interests. And our interest, I think, very much is in not going to war with Iran, right? It would be a huge distraction of resources. It would be massively expensive to our country.
There it is. America's interest, not going to war with Iran. It's massively expensive, and it is a massive diversion of resources. And it's fair to say that most Americans agreed with Vance. That was part of his appeal. He presented himself as the guy saying, maybe America doesn't have to solve everything in the Middle East by dropping something out of an airplane. And honestly, at the time, that sounded pretty refreshing. And then reality strikes, just like the bombs that were supposedly not supposed to be dropped over the Middle East. Because politicians meet governing. Fast forward to Vice President J.D. Vance. Rogan asks him whether, if the Iran decision had ultimately been his, would he have done the same thing?
If it was your call, would you have done exactly the same thing?
Well, what did the president said publicly that JD was less enthusiastic about it, I think was the exact phrase that he used. I mean, my attitude towards this, man, as you know, is the vice president. I'm not a public commentator. Like my job is to give the best advice I can to the president of the United States. I think he's said a little bit about what that advice was. But once the president makes a decision, so long as I think that it's, you know, legal and ethical and all that stuff, and I certainly think whether you agree or disagree with it, what we've done has been legal. My attitude towards it is I try to make it as successful as possible.
Now, that's a fascinating answer, and I won't even call it hypocrisy, because we all know the vice president essentially has zero power. The job of the vice president is to merely advise the president of the United States privately. Trump makes the final call, and once that decision has been made, assuming that it's lawful, it's Vance's job to help the administration execute that directive. That's government for you. But here's the problem for campaign voters. Campaign JD says, going to war with Iran is not in America's interest. Government JD says, I advised the president. He made the decision. Now my job is to make the policy succeed. And here's the deal. Those are not logically incompatible statements. But we're not here to argue semantics. We want answers, and this happens every single election cycle. Campaigns sell promises as absolutes, and governments deliver disclaimers as excuses. Thankfully, Rogan pushed back even further. He flat out asks JD whether Trump would have still pursued the Iran campaign without Israeli interference. Listen to JD.
Do you think that Israel is affecting American political judgment? Do you
Man.
think that we would have started this war in Iran without the influence of Israel?
I think the president, completely separate from any influence from Israel, believes very strongly, and again, I agree with this, that Iran should not have a nuclear weapon.
Do you think he would have continued with the most recent campaign if it wasn't for the influence of
Yes.
Israel?
Yes, I do.
Really?
I do. Yeah.
And there you go. The administration owns it. Trump owns it. JD owns his role in it. And again, I'm glad JD has enough honor to at least defend the administration that he serves rather than accepting zero culpability and throwing his own party under the bus. After all, we saw how that worked out for Mike Pence. But that's exactly why I'm skeptical about politicians telling us what they're going to do next time. Because it wouldn't even be enough to say that politicians just flip-flop anymore. Now, they update their terms of service. America isn't going to war with Iran. Update available. The circumstances changed. Don't worry about it. Release the Epstein files. Update available. Well, the communications could have been better. I'm not thinking about 2028. Update pending. Apparently, we're all just expected to click I agree without even reading the terms of service. But I hate to break it to you, JD. Some of us do remember. This isn't Men in Black, and you can't wave a little neuralizer to erase our memories. Flash. You've never heard me say anything about Iran. Flash. The Epstein rollout went great. Flash. I never considered becoming president of the United States. No, that's not how this works. We're keeping receipts now. And truthfully, here's where I land on Vance. I don't even think he's that bad of a guy. I know his hands are tied politically, but we want action and not empty promises. He's politically talented, and I'll give it to him, he's a strong communicator. And unlike most politicians, he's actually willing to sit down for a long-form conversation and actually give you some answers that somewhat resemble that of a human being. And for that reason, I think he should be held to a higher standard, not a lower one. Maybe the sudden Epstein criticism has nothing to do with 2028 because I can't prove his motive. Maybe he's finally just saying what he believes, which I very much respect. However, prove it, because if JD Vance eventually wants the American people to promote him from Vice President of the United States to President of the United States, because he needs to show us what Vice President Vance is doing today, not promising what President Vance might do for us someday. You've already admitted to us that the Epstein rollout was mishandled. You explicitly told us that information should have gotten out faster. And you told Joe Rogan that you effectively have unlimited access. So use it. You're already in the building. Try opening a few doors. They might actually lead somewhere. Because the 2028 election cycle is gonna be here before you know it. Anyways, another election, another promise, and another circus.